broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for our Lean Validation webinar presented by Valerie King-Bailey, the CEO of Onshore Technology Group. My name is Josh Richards, and I'm the Marketing Director for Marriage Solutions. And before, handing over controls to Valerie today, I wanted to take just a minute to introduce Marriage Solutions and frame our discussion for today. So this webinar is the first in a series that we plan on holding and hosting with Valerie, geared towards life sciences FDA regulated companies. We'll include links to future webinars when we send out the recording of today's session. So this session is being recorded and will be shared following the event. There's a Q&A panel on the right-hand side of your screen. So please feel free to submit any questions you may have throughout the presentation, and Valerie I think would oblige us in answering anything that she can, anything we have time for. And then getting into, the about Merit, just real quick. I know there's a lot going on the screen right now. Really at our core, Merit Solutions is a consulting firm headquartered in Chicago. We have 5 offices throughout the US and in Europe. Our strategy is to be deep and not wide. So we focus 100% on the Microsoft Business Platform, Azure Dynamics. I think we're really unique right now in terms of Microsoft consulting organizations, as our expertise reaches across the entire platform, from those traditional ERP and CRM apps all the way to the newer digital capabilities such as mobile apps, IoT, machine learning. So we're capable of being your single source provider of all your digital technology needs. And that's not something we've seen many other organizations capable of promising, especially within this regulated space. But what I think is most important, what's biggest on the screen right now, are the client satisfaction scores that we have. So what you're seeing on the screen right now is a trailing representation of the previous 15 quarters of client satisfaction scores, where you can notice that our clients consistently rate us above a 4 out of 5. And again, when Gartner says 55 to 75% of projects fail to achieve their desired objectives, we think this is an extremely rare scenario to be in. And so we're very proud of those scores and do whatever we can to achieve successful outcomes for all of our clients. So that's my brief rundown on today. Again, please feel free to submit any questions if you have them. We'll follow up with the recording. Otherwise, Valerie, I will hand controls over to you and let you lead us through lean validation.
Okay, thank you, Josh. Can you hear me okay, Josh?
I can.
Okay, very good. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Valerie King-Bailey. I'm the CEO of Onshore Technology Group. And today I'm going to present a topic to you that you may not have heard a lot about, and it's called lean validation. Just really quickly to share with you where I'm calling you from today. I'm calling you from beautiful downtown Chicago. If you look all the way to the right hand of your screen, you'll see a big tall black building. That is the building where I'm calling you from. That's the headquarters of Lake Point Tower in Chicago and the headquarters of Onshore. This is downtown Chicago, if you recognize that. We are an independent validation and verification firm. Our total business is validation, and we service the life sciences community. So you can go to our website at www.onshoretech.com and learn more about our company. I'm going to go ahead and get started and share with you today what is lean validation and why is it important for you. Kudos to you today for showing up for this webinar, because this is an important topic in validation circles today. And then the next topic I'm going to go through is to help you look at the Microsoft Dynamics and Azure 365 platform as it relates to validation. And I'm going to talk today about some of the principles and best practices of validating the D365 platform using lean principles and best practices for validation. And then I'd like to share with you a case study of how lean has actually helped a real live bona fide company to accelerate their validation processes and ensure sustained quality and compliance. And then I'd like to talk about how you can take steps towards lean validation to get your own company in line. So essentially, guys, what organizations are looking at today, and this is probably true in your organization, is asking individuals to do more with less. I've been doing validation for about 30 years. I'm formerly an executive from Abbott, and I got the nickname Val the Validator from my days at Abbott because I validated 65 systems. I did a $16 million project at Abbott. And through going through that exercise as well as others over the last 30 years, I've come to look at validation as a process that needs to be automated. For years, we've done validation manually. And today, I'm going to talk to you about why this is so important for you to understand and what are today's best practices for validation. So let's get started. I'm going to talk about lean validation and specifically what you need to know regarding principles of lean, and then we'll get into the D365 area. Lean validation is a best practice or a process for independent validation and verification that takes validation to the next level. If you're familiar with lean manufacturing, it's a process that was invented by Toyota. And essentially, back in the 80s, Toyota came up with this process to deliver just-in-time goods. And in order to deliver just-in-time goods, they realized that they had to streamline and optimize the process. But more importantly, what they did from a lean manufacturing perspective is they eliminated waste and inefficiencies in the process. When you look at the validation process, and when I looked at the validation process, I realized that there were a lot of waste and inefficiencies in the validation process. So for example, if you're a validation engineer, you're probably familiar with actually capturing screenshots and cutting and pasting them into Word documents or maybe even perhaps Excel documents. You may be familiar with electronic document life cycles and workflows for all of your validation documentation, and the bottlenecks and the time and inefficiencies in signing documents manually. When I was at Abbott Laboratories, for example, we had a 120-day document cycle time for some of our documents and everything, and we were able to streamline that. So what lean validation does is it brings IV&V process improvements coupled with automation. You can't really deliver lean unless you deliver automation. And this is what Toyota did in the auto manufacturing area. But the nice thing about lean manufacturing, the principles of lean can be applied to any process. And so what I've done is I've applied them to validation to minimize the waste and inefficiencies and to maximize the value of the process and integrate quality. So before we talk a little bit more about lean, let's think about what regulators are concerned about today. I belong to the Institute of Validation Technology, and a lot of times the FDA attends these sessions, and I'm always curious to understand what are the hot topics that they're concerned about. Now, of course, this isn't comprehensive, but if you think about it with respect to computer systems, they are mostly concerned with data integrity and the compromise of data. Compromise of data through cybersecurity, data loss through either internal or external factors. They are most concerned that some of the computer systems that are being validated may, if they're not properly operating, may contribute to adulterated product reaching the market. This is the top concern for the FDA because essentially computers that run GMP-related processes have to be treated a little bit differently and with a lot more care. If you think about data integrity, this is a big issue, and not only in the life sciences industry with respect to validation, but this is throughout. About maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, Europe just announced the most stringent privacy law. It's the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. I'm not sure if you heard about that, but it has broad, significant issues for data privacy and data integrity. Most importantly, this law actually says that a person has the right to be forgotten in a particular system. Now, if you think about that with respect to any of the systems that you have, how do you ensure that if a person doesn't want to be in your database anymore, that you can pull that person out of your database and scrub them? It has all kinds of implications. That's a whole different webinar, if you will. But when you look at issues related to secure access, integrity, and authenticity of electronic records, and then most importantly, in a cloud environment, maintaining the validated state, all of these issues could possibly compromise public health and safety. And this is what the regulators are concerned about. So when we look at Dynamics 365 in the context of lean validation principles, let's look at this application and let's look at the implications and the impact that this may have on your organization. Now, most of you, I don't have to tell you, you're dealing with advanced technology now. So cloud computing and things like the Internet of Things are really turning some of the principles of validation on its head. When you think of the Internet of Things, being able to put advanced computing technology into quote unquote things, it brings another dimension from the standpoint of validation, because how then do you validate that? A lot of systems, including Microsoft Dynamics 365, have analytics and intelligence associated with them. And then human-machine interfaces and wearables, and of course, 3D robotics and printing. So when you look at how all of this impacts computer systems, we really do need to change the way we look at today's computer systems. Now let's look at D365 in its perspective. And I'm going to share with you what my reaction was to this diagram the first time I saw it. Now keep in mind, I've been doing validation for 30 years and typically following the V model or GAMP5. Look at what Dynamics 365 architecture is. Let's start at the bottom. We have something called Microsoft Azure. It's a platform that delivers or services applications such as Dynamics 365. On the next slide, I'm going to show you Azure in a little bit more detail. But look at the other layer there. There's an application platform that has Power Apps, Power Embedded Flow, and a common data model. And then it gets interesting. You'll notice on the left-hand side, we have Office 365, and then we have Power BI, Cortana Intelligence, and Azure, the Internet of Things. So the first time I saw this, I said, wow, the Internet of Things, how do you validate that? Hold that thought. Then we go to Dynamics 365 itself, and most of my life sciences customers with Merit use Dynamics for operations. Sometimes the field service modules come into play, customer service and so forth, but mostly that's what the life sciences companies do. Inside of that blue box is 21 CFR Part 11, electronic records and electronic signatures. And then the purple box on the right-hand side are all of the third-party business applications. So let's stop and think about this for a second. How do you validate that system? I've got Azure on the bottom, I've got Office 365, I've got third-party applications that are integrated, and I could have added mobility because this platform also supports mobile applications. So now let's look at the top. Now I have a Microsoft App Source store. Think about where apps come from. If you have a Apple phone, or if you have a Samsung or an Android phone, You know that you can go into the, App Store or Google Play, and you can download apps. The unique nature about apps is that they can be actually created by any company. One of the things that we have to do as validation engineers is we have to figure out the source of these applications and the integrity of these apps. So when I looked at this whole architecture, I asked the simple question: how do you validate this system? Think about change control in a cloud environment. How do you validate this and maintain the validated state? How do you deal with applications that can be integrated into Dynamics 365 from the App Store? How do you integrate third-party business applications within the system? It's very interesting to look at that, and I'm going to answer that shortly. The cloud ecosystem, this is what Microsoft Azure looks like underneath the hood. So you have a public cloud, on-premises cloud, and then you have certain Windows services. All of these services are necessary. You have storage, you have virtualization, you have file services, you have failover, networking, virtual desktop infrastructure. Azure is a very complex architecture, but it's a powerful and robust architecture that would allow you to be able to leverage solutions like Dynamics 365 and MaxLife. And we're going to get to that in just a second, and bring these into a common platform. But if you think about the previous diagram and this diagram, there are a lot of moving parts. So what does this mean? This means that this architecture has to be delivered by a vendor that has a high degree of integrity, and that's Microsoft. So here's my homework for you, and the first thing I'm going to ask you to do after this call. Microsoft has a trust center. It's at www.microsoft.com/trust center, all one word. I want you to go to Microsoft's Trust Center after this webinar and take a look at the information that Microsoft now publishes online regarding compliance. When I worked at Abbott Laboratories, one of the banes of my existence is, the fact that I couldn't get really any quality information out of Microsoft. When I called and asked originally for information, Microsoft's attorneys told me they make no warranties, express or implied, about their software, and therefore they couldn't give me any information on the quality of the software, how they were, complying with controls, any information about quality. That Microsoft Trust Center that I gave you just now is a wonderful, wonderful resource, because Microsoft finally does give you information about that, and it speaks to what a quality vendor they have now become in terms of them providing this kind of information for life sciences. One of the things that I found on the Trust Center are their service organization control reports. These reports I use because they're independent third-party reports. We use them to understand how Microsoft is managing this entire infrastructure that you're seeing on the screen. So it's a very powerful tool that you have at your disposal, and it answers the first part of the question: how do I validate this, and how do I know when my cloud environment changes? Because Microsoft actually tells you that information now. This wasn't always the case, but now they tell you the information that you need to know to keep this system in a validated state. So there are 4 challenges that you have to deal with when looking at maintaining the validated state in a D365 Azure environment. Number 1, you have to deal with change control. For any validated system, and I'm not saying anything you don't already know, change control is super important, and it happens continuously. Then you have to be concerned about data integrity. Once you get information in the cloud, how is that information managed, and can I ensure data integrity? The third thing that you have to be worried about is regression testing. As you well know, anytime you change information in a cloud environment, you have to retest that system to make sure that the system is maintained in a validated state. And then fourth, you need to have the information at your disposal to generate the required documented evidence for the FDA. The FDA definition of validation is documented evidence that a system conforms to its intended use based on predetermined specifications and critical quality attributes. We need to be able to generate the document. Now, that fourth bubble is the one that we used to do manually all the time. And actually, all of these were manual, but the fourth one gives you a little bit of heartburn because we used to generate test scripts in a manual way. They were manual requirements traceability. There were physical instead of electronic signatures. There was, a manual route review and approval process and so forth. With automated tools, you can automate the development of your test scripts, the development of your requirements documentation, the development of your requirements traceability, and leverage electronic signatures to route review and approve your validation documentation and ultimately reduce cycle time. So the lean validation strategy that I talked about addresses each of the four areas that we have here. So my lean validation approach for Microsoft Dynamics 365 starts with a set of standard operating procedures that provide governance for your validated process. I always tell my clients, you can't really validate a system unless you have a set of standard operating procedures that provide governance for validation. The second thing that you need to be concerned about is your supplier assessment. The supplier assessment is an essential part of the validation process. It's the essential part of any GMP process, frankly, because before you're able to use any supplier, you need to conduct the supplier assessment on it. Well, here is where the rub was in times past and days of old with Microsoft. Microsoft would not permit an on-site supplier audit, but they also, back in the old days in the 90s, they would not permit information to be disseminated about quality. Microsoft has changed their position on this entirely, and the Trust Center provides everything that you need to conduct the supplier audit on Microsoft. And then we collect with our supplier audit the SOC1. SOC stands for Service Organization Control Reports. There's an SOC1, an SOC2, and an SOC3 reports. What are these? They're independent audit reports. Specifically, Microsoft uses Deloitte. They come into Microsoft and they specifically examine the controls and they tell you whether Microsoft is complying with those controls or not complying with the controls. This is huge because when you start to look at is Microsoft complying, it was a good faith effort before, but now you have tangible audit evidence. So Microsoft recognized that instead of having every company who uses D365 come and independently audit them, they would use independent auditors, and these auditors would publish these reports to the industry that share with the industry whether or not Microsoft is complying. Now, you may say, well, Microsoft has paid for these reports, so obviously they're going to say nice things. No, just as Deloitte, who is a certified public accountant, can't lie about financials, they can't lie about these reports either. So the first one I read about 6 years ago, there were several controls that Microsoft didn't meet, and Deloitte set them. They wrote exceptions in the report. So if you think these reports are just marketing spin, think again, it's not. These are real reports that you can use. This is objective evidence which says to the FDA that I've done my due diligence with respect to this supplier. So we archive the SOC 1 and 2 and 3 reports with our validation package. Then you want to conduct a risk assessment. All computer system validation projects right now are risk-based. And so you want to conduct a risk-based assessment. And then the process gets interesting. You want to review your system environment that's provisioned for Dynamics 365 and identify any further technical or control procedures that you may need to have that are unique to your environment. And then you want to identify shared roles and responsibility and establish security. I've been through many, many FDA audits in the past. They will absolutely ask you about system security. This is one of the biggest things that they're concerned about. When you're implementing and deploying Dynamics 365 in Azure, you want to pay attention to this, and you want to ensure the segregation of duties as you map out your roles and responsibilities in system security. And then you want to develop key deliverables, the user requirement specification, a risk assessment, functional requirement specification. If Merit or any other system integrator does custom development for you, you want to have a design spec, a configuration spec, and all of the required documents around. Now, when we get to the cloud infrastructure, this is interesting because IQ, installation qualification, used to refer to the systematic and repeatability of an installation process to ensure that software was installed according to its intended purpose and according to specified guidelines. For virtual clouds such as D365 and Azure, it is provisioned, not necessarily install the way we used to do it in the old days. So what you want to do is to make sure that the system is provisioned, and this is a verification of the provisioning of the system. And then you want to go through your test application lifecycle, your OQ and your PQ, and then onshore has added a fourth one, which is CyQ, cybersecurity qualification. I'm going to talk about that in just a second. And then we summarize this. So when you're validating in the cloud, there are a couple of takeaways that I want you to get. Number one, you're going to have procedures in place. You're going to have standard operating procedures that provide governance for your use of the cloud. A lot of companies don't have a cloud SOP. If you don't have one, email me and I'll send you one. The second one that you'll need, that maybe perhaps you have or don't have, is one that addresses cybersecurity in validated systems environments. The elephant in the room today has to do with cybersecurity. If you're not considering cybersecurity with your validated systems, that's a mistake. If you don't have a CyQ policy, I can give you one. So send me an email message and I'm happy to send it to you. So when you're qualifying Azure versus necessarily validating it, the application should be validated and IT infrastructure should be qualified according to the EU GMP Annex 11. GAMP also has guidance on infrastructure qualification and the validation of applications. Now, by way of full disclosure, I am a GAMP reviewer. So whenever these good practice guides come out, I actually am one of the reviewers that provides commentary and feedback on the guides themselves. I'm actually working on one right now for cloud infrastructure that GAMP is going to be releasing in the future. You want to make sure that you look at the infrastructure and don't ignore that just because it's in the cloud. I have a lot of people tell me, well, you know, it's in the cloud, so I don't have to worry about it. That's actually a misnomer. There are certainly differences in your responsibility in the cloud. You're not responsible for the setup and configuration of the hardware, for example, but you certainly do have to ensure that your cloud environment is properly established. So your IQ documentation is still needed, even though you're in the cloud. The principles of validation endure even in the cloud. So remember, you still have to validate system, but there is a difference in the way you do it in a cloud environment versus an on-premise environment. When you look at the Internet of Things and you think of the fact that I could have devices from a household perspective, we can take household devices and put computer technology in them, but in the context of a pharmaceutical, a medical device, a biotechnology company, nutraceutical, or tobacco company, you may be putting computer technology into various things across your organization that may drive manufacturing processes. When you look at these things, it is super important that you understand that these things have to be validated as well. I was dealing with a medical device company that has, they do diabetes therapy medical devices, and they put computer technology into a device that actually allows people to capture information regarding diabetics and actually report this information to the patient. And it's a cloud-based system. You are going to find now that there are many things that are being put into clouds. And so when you deal with the Internet of Things, there is a methodology for validating this. I just went live with the cloud system that was an Internet of Things cloud application. So the takeaway for you today is to understand that the Internet of Things changes the strategy of the way you validate these systems. So the things that keep the regulators up at night: vulnerability of your data, data integrity, the security. Are you keeping your information secure? And how do you minimize the impact to product safety and patient safety at the end of the day? And as I mentioned, with cloud-based systems, the elephant in the room has to do with change control. The number one question that I get asked on a weekly basis is, how do I manage change control in a cloud environment? Change control can be managed. So that trust center that I told you about for Microsoft, Microsoft actually publishes the changes that they make to D365 and to Azure online. So no longer is it the case that, well, I don't know how often Microsoft is changing the system and the impact of those changes. So how am I able to keep up with my validation? This information is published online. I actually had a conversation with the FDA regarding this, and I was asking them about, the cloud and how often you should validate or revalidate the system and look at it. And the auditor explained to me, depending on the risk of the system and depending on the level of changes and the impact of those changes, you should look at your environment and do what they call continuous testing. Now, continuous testing kind of freaks people out because they go, wait a minute, you mean I'm going to have to continuously test my system? No, no, no. When they say continuously testing, they mean testing on a routine basis, regression testing to ensure that the system is maintained in a validated state. So here's what we practically do at Onshore when we have systems like this. Every 3 months, or every 6 months, we take all of the reports for D365 and we look at the changes. Now, spoiler alert, a lot of the changes are on the back end. They're for performance and security. So a lot of them do not have any impact on the actual D365 application in and of itself. But as you well know, I can apply a patch that fixes something on the back end and it breaks something on the front end. So what we do is a minimum level of testing. Most of my customers who do this, the revalidation effort can be done in a matter of days, not weeks. So they do an impact assessment, they look at all of the changes, they do a risk assessment to determine how the changes impacted the system, and then they conduct a level of regression testing. This is where automation comes in, because if you have an automated system like we do, you can actually go into your automated systems environment and pull the test scripts from a reusable test script library, and you can publish those tests and get them done quickly. The last one I did for D365 back in March, It took 3 days for us to revalidate the system after we examined the changes in the system. So everything that I've told you about the architecture of Microsoft Azure, the architecture of Dynamics 365, and the Internet of Things and cybersecurity draws us to the conclusion that validation as we know it is dead. Back in the Stone Age in the 80s, when I first started doing validation in 1981, we used to do everything manually, and the philosophy of validation is that we would validate the whole system, and it didn't matter what the risk was of the system. We tested everything anyway in all of our systems. This is changing now. You've got the Internet of Things, you've got mobility that's added to validated systems, you've got issues concerning cybersecurity and a host of other issues, which means that validation as we know it is really changing. So what I usually say to clients is that the clear and present danger to validated systems are threats associated with the cloud and cybersecurity. You really do need to look at how your systems are being managed in the cloud and really maintain those systems as you go through your validation to ensure that those systems are maintained in a validated state. Let me share with you a conversation that I had with an FDA auditor. I said, can a system like this be validated? And I showed the auditor my diagram. And her answer to me was revealing. She said, yes, software is software. And she said, the difference is how the software is served, whether it's served in your premise, in your environment, or whether it's served in the cloud. What she also said is that the FDA doesn't make a distinction, but they look at those 4 pillars that I was explaining to you: data integrity, system security, and so forth, how you're managing the data over time. And they look at how often you're testing to ensure that your system is maintained in a validated state. Yes, Microsoft Dynamics 365 absolutely can be validated. Now, I validate it all the time, with clients, and have been doing so since the product has been on the market. But it absolutely can. And that's why a lot of vendors, not just Microsoft, but SAP, Oracle has Oracle Fusion Cloud, and there are many cloud vendors out there because the FDA is not concerned about whether it's in the cloud or not. That's a discussion that has been settled. Everything that they do pretty much at the FDA now is cloud-based. And that goes for the federal government in and of itself. They had an initiative about 7 or 8 years ago where they were trying to move a lot of things to the cloud. So the cloud isn't the issue. It's how you manage the cloud that is the issue from their perspective. So it's really time to rethink the way we validate computer systems and how we deal with the vulnerabilities. One of the things that we didn't do back in the 80s, there was no such thing as cybersecurity back in the 80s. We never even considered it. Today, to not consider cybersecurity, you would be remiss not to consider this. Cybersecurity threats bring more vulnerabilities to not only validated systems, but non-validated systems. And I don't need to tell you how many threats are out there because you can pick up any newspaper and read the headlines every day. So-and-so company got broken into and were the subject of a cyber attack. It even happened in our federal government in the office of the president. So no system is completely immune for that. But how do you deal with it? And lean validation strategies can help to deal with this. So when we think of validation, this is kind of the new thinking that we're looking at. We're looking at cybersecurity losses. We're looking at software quality in the cloud. How does the cloud impact software quality when it's in an ever-changing environment? We look at issues concerning data integrity. We look at mobile applications. Mobility, yes, is a part of any system. So you can look at Microsoft, but you can take a look at any of the other systems, SAP, Oracle Fusion, Oracle eBusiness, any of these enterprise technologies. Right now, a lot of vendors are adding a mobile component because if you look on your desk right in front of you, you have a mobile device sitting there. These things are now more powerful. And back now, if you look at that telephone that you have on your desk, it's more powerful than some of the computers I used to validate in 1981. We look at data breaches. How susceptible are your validated systems to a data breach? And then compliance. The old way of looking at validation doesn't work anymore. And so progressive forward-thinking companies have to take into consideration all of these issues that are brought about by new innovative technologies and act accordingly. So when we look at the good principles of validation, you need to conduct a risk assessment. You also need to ensure change control in a validated state. You must, you must incorporate cybersecurity testing and cybersecurity qualification. Cyber threats are a reality and they affect validated systems and non-validated systems. Be proactive in looking at that. And then responsibilities change when you move through the cloud. Microsoft has a certain level of responsibility for the cloud, and you have a certain level of responsibility. So you want to look at these principles and make sure that you're adhering to these principles and governing yourself accordingly. When you look at maintaining the validated state, you have to understand that all service providers are not created equal. And I'm talking about service providers, cloud service providers, not professional service providers. The SSAE 16, SOC 1, 2, and 3 reports were not necessarily aligned with 21 CFR and the quality system regulations, but the SOC controls report on controls placed in the operating environment as of a specific date. So what I mean by that is Microsoft does these SOC 1, 2, 3 reports routinely. A lot of your data centers are not familiar with unique regulatory requirements in our environment, and there's only a couple of providers that I will deal with when it comes to cloud validation, because if your data center doesn't understand the unique requirements of life sciences companies, pharma, medical device, tobacco companies, chemical companies, etc., they won't know the unique challenges and burden of proof that is on you. That you have to deal with. So you want to make sure that you look at these service organization control reports and archive them with your validation package. Now, in order to accelerate the validation of Dynamics 365, we have an accelerator that allows you to do that. So we take Validation Master, which is our enterprise validation management system. We take a full set of user requirements that are out of the box. And number 3, we take a full set of IQ, OQ, PQ test scripts to validate Dynamics 365. And when 365 changes, we update these test scripts. Instead of giving you, and what we used to do is we used to hand you about 300 documents that represented all of your user requirements, your validation master plan, the risk assessment, and all of your IQ, OQ, PQ test scripts. We would give you all of that documentation and you would run through the scripts. Now that the scripts are actually in the system and the requirements are built into the system, and the traceability from the traceability of your test scripts to the requirements, now your traceability matrix can be generated with the push of a button. Now I can go into my test scripts and I can execute my test scripts, and I have a single source of truth for all of my validation projects. And this system is not only good for Dynamics 365, but it's good for any system that's on the desktop. So when we look at lean validation principles and best practices, we need to really get into lean thinking. And so when you look at the principles of lean, and I've talked a little bit about these, of quality, variability, responsiveness, and being able to manage and eliminate waste and understand how we can deliver greater value to our companies by streamlining and optimizing the process. This is an important process. So when you look at the 5 principles of lean, there's value stream, flow, pull, and perfection. Now, what these mean from a validation perspective is that we blend people, processes, and technology together to streamline and to optimize our process. This is really the foundation of our validation and verification success. Value expressed in terms of validation means that we have a quality software application that is in compliance with current guidelines. The value stream means that we can use agile technologies to streamline and eliminate non-value added processes in the validation process for optimal control. Flow means that there is a seamless transition between one stage of the validation process to the other to ensure consistency and compliance. And then pull means there is a risk-based approach. That means that I only validate according to the risk, where risk actually drives the level of validation due diligence. And then perfection is really the continuous pursuit of excellence and continuous improvement along the validation process. So when you look at these 5 parameters, and when Toyota, and this comes from the Toyota lean manufacturing model, when Toyota looked at this, they applied it to manufacturing. But as you can see, you can apply these same principles to computer systems validation. So when we look at the PsyQ, the cybersecurity is designed around the NIST cybersecurity framework. NIST is the National Institute of Science and Technology, and they developed the cybersecurity framework that is used not only throughout our federal government, but it's used worldwide. It is the industry standard for cybersecurity controls. Here's the good news. If you go to Microsoft's Trust Center, Microsoft has actually filled out the NIST cybersecurity framework for you, and they've actually explained to you in their own words how Microsoft Dynamics 365 and Azure meet this framework. So that work is already done for you. So when we look at a PsyQ involves a risk assessment, a cybersecurity qualification assessment that looks at your cybersecurity readiness based on the NIST framework, and then we conduct penetration testing and application security testing as part of our PsyQ testing, and this is coupled with our IQ, OQ, PQ testing. That's the PsyQ strategy. So when you look at the enhanced validation testing strategy, you have traditional IQ, OQ, PQ, but then you have the PsyQ as the enhanced strategy for validation. And this allows you to look comprehensively at your system to ensure compliance and readiness to protect yourself against a cyber event. So what does a PsyQ actually look like? It's an Excel spreadsheet that we've developed. So if you look at this Excel spreadsheet, you'll see that there is a and I'm going to blow this up a little bit on my screen so that you can see it a little bit better. But you can look at a cybersecurity qualification, and it forces an assessment in each of the areas: your cyber risk management and oversight, threat intelligence and collaboration, cybersecurity controls, external dependency, and cyber incident management. And based on your assessment, which is on the different workbooks or spreadsheets inside of the workbook, you can look at this, and once you go through the assessment, you're given a score. Your maturity score tells you how well you are protected against a cyber event. The first time I did one of these for a customer, my customer got a 34%, not very ready for protecting against the cyber threat. And what this does is it shows regulators a level of due diligence that you are doing to protect yourself against the cyber attack. Remember, at the beginning of my presentation, I said the thing that regulators are most concerned about is how vulnerable you are. And that's what a PsyQ is all about. So if you'd like to see the cybersecurity qualification, I'm more than happy to share that with you. And then this is more due diligence and where the cybersecurity framework comes from. It looks at 98 controls across your organization to determine your level of analysis. If you'd like a copy of the SciQ Excel spreadsheet, I'm happy to send it to you. We usually document this in our validation package. Remember the old adage, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. So everything in a validation package has to be documented, and we go ahead and we document that. And automation is the key to testing. So this is an example of what we do here at Onshore. We can actually set a time. So in the red circle, you see that I can test my systems on a daily basis, hourly basis, quarterly basis, etc. For some of the automated testing, fully automated testing we do, I can set this timer, and at a particular point in time, let's say midnight tonight, the system will go out, open up Microsoft Dynamics 365, test the system, and report the results back to Validation Master. That's what continuous testing is all about. Now, the key is automation. Certainly, you can do this manually, but I think you'll agree it's much easier to do it if you have a system to do that for you. So we select the time for the fully automated run, and I can set any time that I want to on the clock, and I'm able to go through and have my system go out and test. So you want to implement a good cybersecurity and risk management practice for lean validation. You want to conduct your SciQ assessment, look at strategic planning, deploy defense assets, develop and implement training, do validation testing, your continuous testing, and then reassess and refine this process over a period of time to ensure compliance. So if you look at a lean validation case study, I had a medical device manufacturer who was looking to validate and implement Dynamics 365, and they had a couple of issues. They were concerned about cloud validation and how to conduct the supplier audit. They were concerned about compliance with regulations like the QSR, 21 CFR 820, Part 11, 820.30 for medical devices. They were implementing Merit Max Life, master planning, production and inventory, and then they had third-party applications for barcode scanning. They also implemented about 18 unique customizations that were unique to their company. And here was the big rub. They wanted to go live within 8 months. What they did is they took our Cloudmaster 365 accelerator, and this really sped up the requirements development process because it came with a set of out-of-the-box requirements. We took those requirements and we have them not only for D365, but we have them for Max Life as well. So we gave them a comprehensive set of requirements. We reduced the number of scripts that we had to write by 60% because most of the scripts were already provided. We established a reusable test library. We had over 300 scripts. We developed all of the validation documentation, including the final validation package, and we collected on their behalf all of the SOC 1, 2, 3 reports, and we conducted our SciQ. The results of this, the project was delivered on time and within budget. The client saved 60% using the principles of lean validation that I've shared with you today and using the validation accelerator to streamline the testing and documentation of the D365 Merit Max Life implementation. They established a reusable test script library for subsequent validation exercises, and they were able to use the system to actually conduct their user acceptance testing and their periodic review. And they had all of the documentation online. So when the auditors came in, they had one place to go to show all of the documentation for their validation. So when we look at the 10 steps to lean validation success, these are the bottom line results. You want to consider the D365 architecture and infrastructure that I showed you earlier, and you want to make sure that you understand the implication and the impact that that infrastructure has on your validation. You also want to establish standard operating procedures. Make sure that you have one for the cloud, Make sure that you have one for cybersecurity. Third point, automate. Make sure that you leverage automation. Lean validation is process improvements coupled with automation. Today, it is possible to automate your validation process. To validate D365 in the cloud, you're going to have to examine the Service Organization Control Reports. www.microsoft.com/Trust Center. Look at the Trust Center and pull those supplier audit reports down. You also want to leverage electronic signatures. Today, many organizations still use paper, way too many organizations. Electronic signatures are going to save you time and money. Many people think that I'm saving money by not buying an application like DocuSign or whatever you want to use for electronic system. You're actually losing money because it takes you 10 times the amount of time to do that. When I was at Abbott Laboratories, I shared earlier, our cycle time was 120 days. Using electronic signature, we got that down to 2 weeks. You think you're saving money by not using electronic signatures? Think again. Consider cybersecurity qualification. Spoiler alert, you will be hacked. The question is, are you ready? Or are your validated systems in a state of readiness? Or do you want to roll the dice and leave that to the IT guys? I would think not. You want to consider cybersecurity qualification. Number 7, you do want to embrace lean thinking. Lean thinking is designed to optimize, streamline the process, and ensure sustained quality and compliance over time. Just like Toyota became the #1 car company in the United States by applying this principle, and Walmart even uses lean principles as they manage their supply chain. Lean thinking can be brought to any process. This is state of the art. This is the wave of the future for validation. Also, you want to encourage a continuous testing strategy. Continuous testing is possible through automation. You can do it manually, again, but you want to save time and money. Leverage an automated system to do that. And number 9 goes hand in hand. Build a reusable test script library. In the old days, back in the 80s, I used to write all my test scripts over and over and over again. There's no need to do that. Automation is here. You want to automate and build yourself a reusable test library to make it easy to continuously test and validate D365. And then leverage the Cloud Master Accelerator. Why build all of your test scripts on your own when you can use the accelerator to accelerate Dynamics 365 to ensure validation success? So with that, I'll open it up to questions and ask if you have any questions for me today.
Thanks so much, Val. I do not see anything on my end other than the questions that were sent your way, so I'll let you go ahead and roll through those and see if we get any more submitted.
Okay, I had one question that was asked of me early during the webinar. Someone asked, did we need standard operating procedures for cloud and cybersecurity? And I think during the presentation, I did answer this one, but I wanted to throw out an extension. Yes, you do need cloud and cybersecurity SOPs. If you don't have a cloud SOP that provides governance for validated systems or a cybersecurity one, you can write me at vkbailey@onshoretech.com and I'll send you one. But yes, you do need that. Another question that came in had to do with challenges that I ran into when validating cloud applications. So the writer asked, what sort of challenges have you run into when validating cloud applications and having the FDA audit those applications? That's a great question. A lot of the challenges that we saw initially in validating cloud applications is getting our head around the level of responsibilities. What were we responsible for and what was the vendor responsible for? The other thing that we looked at that was somewhat of a challenge is understanding how to conduct a thorough supplier audit. And then thirdly, disaster recovery. All validated systems have a disaster recovery component. You have to have a disaster recovery strategy. We work with Microsoft to understand their disaster recovery strategy with respect to Azure and the D365 environment. Those were the three challenges. And as you saw in the webinar, we really addressed those challenges as we went through the process of establishing not only Cloudmaster 365, but working with Microsoft and working with Merit Solutions to make sure that we had all of the documentation that was necessary to streamline the process for you. That was a great question. Um, the next one that someone asked here, that this one just came in, can we get a demo of Validation Master? Of course. If you go to www.validationmaster.com, we do weekly demos every Tuesday and Thursday. You can pick any or Tuesday or Thursday from now until the end of the year, and we will give you a demonstration of the system. And then thirdly, someone was asking about the SciQ and can they get the Excel spreadsheet? And yes, if you send me an email at vkbailey@onshoretech.com, I'm happy to share that cybersecurity spreadsheet with all of the attendees today. Let's see, Josh, that's all that I have.
I did have one more question come in.
Okay.
I am in an industry where FDA guidelines are pending. What are some steps my company should start taking now to ensure we transition smoothly?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. Steps that you need to take is if they have draft guidance, and usually the way guidance comes out of the FDA, it's issued in draft guidance form. What I would do is I would look at the draft guidance first to see the direction that they're heading in. I would also comment on the guidance because for all laws that are in the Code of Federal Regulation, there is a comment period where the industry is allowed to actually comment or respond to pending regulations that are coming. I would look at that and comment, get your team together and comment on any pending regulation. I was at Abbott Laboratories when 21 CFR Part 11 became a final rule. We absolutely at Abbott Laboratories commented on the regulation because it was going to affect us. The other thing that you can do is coming to a session like this, because what we do is we talk about practical things that would actually help you. You also want to look at some of the established companies. If your company has not been subject to GMPs but is now subject to GMPs or FDA regulated guidelines, I would look at the latest guidance and start reading some of the information on how computer systems are validated and some of the things that you need to do. What this will do is it'll help you to get ready for that. And then once the regulation comes out, kind of start thinking early about the strategy and how your organization would get up to speed and some of the steps that you need to take early on to get yourself up to speed. So things that you're going to have to do when any regulation comes out. You're going to have a set of standard operating procedures that provide governance for that. You need to put that on a timeline and put that in your plan. You're going to have to train individuals on the regulation. You need to think early about how you're going to train people. And then you need to, as I said, keep abreast of where the regulation is heading, so that you know the things that you can do and look at a gap assessment to determine these are the things that we already have, that we're already doing in absence of the regulation, and these are the things that we'll need to do. Those are some clear, practical steps that you can take. Great question.
That's all I have on my side.
Okay, well, thank you everyone so much for attending. And if you'd like to get a copy of the cybersecurity SOPs and the SciQ assessment, shoot me an email and I'm happy to send it over to you. Thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. You too, Valerie. Have a good day.
Okay, take care. Bye
Bye.
now.